family. I know you are all excited to see each other and be in community in this moment, but if you could find your way to that lovely seat that has your name on it, with a beautiful plated salad in front of you, we would love to start this program. We are so grateful for all of you, near and far, friends of Scotland, old and new. What a day, and really what a place. What a place to begin our day-long celebration of Scotland and its African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. My name is Leslie Foster. I'm an evening anchor at WUSA 9 here in Washington, and I'm deeply honored to be your mistress of ceremonies today. And I think 100 years is obviously a pretty remarkable milestone for a place of worship, and I think it's also pretty fitting that we are here in this space, in this incredible home, with all of us here to bear witness. So I think friend might be the most important word of the day, and I know that when the church's pastor, the Reverend Dr. Evelina Hudgens, launched the Second Century Project, a primary goal was raising money. And we're going to talk about that today because we still need to raise a lot about it. So this will be a friend raiser of sorts. But the other primary goal of the Second Century Project was what we call authentic community engagement. And for far too long, Scotland just did not have people in high places. They didn't have a lot of friends. Society had left the Scotland community behind and other black communities like it just by the side of the road for way too long. Governments of bygone eras wanted Scotlanders gone from Scotland. But if this project has proved anything, it is that Scotland and its church aren't going anywhere. Scotland now has a seat at every table. Scotland is welcome in every room, even rooms like this one, with Martin Luther King III seated with the county executive Mark Elrich, who are seated with Scotlanders Bernard and Francine Scott, who just celebrated their 56th anniversary of their wedding in the Scotland AME Zion Church on Saturday. We believe it is the very first that took place there in the church, in the new building. So Francine Bernard said he is just glad you've kept him all these years. And we are too. At table 2, we have Pastor Huggins and our newly elected Bishop Brian Thompson, seated with County Council President Andrew Friedson and his wife Demi, and they were married 5 months ago, so they are newlyweds. So the seasoned weds are going to help the newlyweds with some advice, right? At each of these tables, at all the tables where you're seated today, we've got 2 people whose year-long friendship with Scotland has literally changed the game. When Bernard met our hosts, Frank Islam and Debbie Dreisman, a year ago, the fundraising was stalled. And behind the scenes, the Second Century Project team was beginning to worry. But these 2 incredible friends offered to help, making hundreds of introductions, donating tens of thousands of dollars, and of course, opening their beautiful home on numerous occasions at their own cost. So thank you doesn't actually begin to adequately convey the amount of appreciation that the Scotland community feels for each of you. But Frank, I'd like to invite you up to the podium to kick off our program so that we can continue to give our thanks. Frank Islam, everyone.
So, Mark, you're speaking, right?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Don't worry, he's speaking.
Leslie, thank you very much. So, Leslie, thank you for your kind introduction. Good afternoon. My name is Frank Islam. And on behalf of my wife, Debbie, you want to stand up and say hello to everybody? And myself and the members of the host committee, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this luncheon to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Scotland AME Zion Church. This is a special occasion. It is made even more special by having Martin Luther King III to celebrate with and speak to us today. Because Martin Luther King III being here, I want to open my brief comments by quoting him. He said about his father, Martin Luther King Jr., and I quote, He was a bridge builder, not a wall builder. That's a beautiful quote. We're here today at this 100th anniversary of the Scotland Church because we are bridge builders. I say that because all of you at this luncheon came together at the Second Century Project to ensure that the Scotland AME Zion Church would not only be in place for the 100th anniversary, but that it will stay in place for the next 100 years and beyond. As you all know, the Scotland Church, which was built by hand by African slaves and opened in 1924 because it became a center of community life in Montgomery County. And thank you, Mark, to be here. He's the county executive. You want to stand up for it? Sorry about that. Tragically, in 2019, the church basement flooded, a structural wall collapsed, and the church was not usable. That led to the establishment of the Second Century Project in 2022 to raise the funds to reconstruct the church and to rebuild its wall by building bridges access across this community. This collaborative effort among peoples of all races, religion, and lines of endeavor has raised close to $9 million so far. Bernard, you want to stand up and say, and also Paul Tukey. Where's Paul Tukey? Where's Paul? Paul, you want to stand up? They're the one who made it happen. They basically reached out to the people like us to make it happen. Debbie and I had the privilege to host a fundraising reception at our home for the Second Century Project in March with Mitch Rails, and most of you have participated in and contributed to that fundraiser. I also had the privilege of introducing the Scotland Church Second Century Project at the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. International Salute Breakfast in January to receive the Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Award for Civic Engagement and Community Project. And the woman who made it happen is Mandy Lawson. Do you want to stand and be recognized? She was the one who gave the award. And she's fantastic. A city upon a hill. Because of all of you, the Scotland Second Century Project has had an uplifting impact on our entire community. You answer what Martin Luther King Jr. referred to as life's most persistent and urgent question. That question is, what are you doing to help others? That's a good quotation. What you have done to help others to come together in what Martin Luther King Jr. called a coalition of conscience, a coalition of bridge builders, not wall builders, for the Scotland AME Zion Church. It is an honor for me to be a member with you in that coalition and to participate in this luncheon to celebrate the first 100 years of the church. Thanks to what you coalition members have done, to what the Scotland Church and its congregation have done and will do in the future, we have much to celebrate at this luncheon. Thank you very much. Leslie, it's all yours. You guys can start the salad, right, Leslie?
Yes, please. Everyone start enjoying your salad. We're going to make this a working lunch so you don't have to sit and not eat. Frank, thank you so much, and you have clearly done your homework for this cause. What an incredible leader both you and Debbie are together. Next, I'd like to introduce, I'm sorry? Oh, I was going to introduce the pastor to do just that. Is that okay? Do you want to bless the food now, Pastor? Come on up. Let's do that. I shall defer.
Let us pray. For the food that we're about to receive, we give you thanks. We're grateful for this gathering of persons from all walks of life. We thank you for the hands that prepared it, for the hands that shall serve it. We pray that it might strengthen us, that we might be better community, neighbors, people, and to do what we have been assigned to do by purpose and destiny. I pray this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Yes, now don't leave, Pastor Huggins, because I've done a little reading on you, and I discovered some things I didn't know. So, I know you graduated from the old T.C. Williams High School, now Alexandria City High School. But I also found out that some of your friends called you Easy E or Revelina back in the day, because you were an excitable person. Who knew? I learned you matriculated at the Atlantic Christian College in Wilson, North Carolina, and received your Bachelor of Arts degree in religion and philosophy and minored in Spanish, history, and coaching athletics. I understand you went on to get several advanced degrees. You became a licensed counselor, a licensed mortician, wrote several books. This is why we know you don't sleep. And you are a mom to Zion and Imani. And did I also tell all of you that she is the presiding elder of 18 other churches besides Scotland AME Zion? I am not sure how or where you find this energy, but we are so glad that you are tapping into it. So please welcome back Pastor Huggins.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leslie, and I greet all of you this afternoon. I am honored to be in this home to share with you. I'm excited. I'm trying to be poised because all of you are eating and I'll say something to make you laugh, and so I'm trying to be poised. But indeed, we've gathered on this afternoon for what Martin Luther King would call beloved community. We talk about each other and we talk about fundraising and how we can help each other. But I think it's more than resources and more than money. I think it's important that we hear each other's stories, understand each other's cultures, and I can say to you, the Scotland rebuilding effort has done just that. Persons from all walks of life have come together to say we stand with you. Not only are we standing with you, but we hear you. And perhaps more importantly, for the Scotland community, we see you, we feel you. And so I stand to say thank you to each person in this room. Whether you have contributed to our efforts or not, your presence today means a lot to us. Just by word of mouth, just by talking about what's happening on Seven Locks Road, it has given the church exposure that it may not have otherwise had. And so I want to say to each of you how much I sincerely appreciate all that you have done. The Second Century Project, there are persons involved, our chairpersons, the Honorable Ike Leggett and Catherine Leggett. We thank God for them today. Amen, that's right. I am grateful to Paul Tukey and Bernard and Letitia Gassaway and Chuck Williams, who's not here today, and Janet Ross, and all of those persons who comprise the Second Century team. Don't be fooled. The pastor hasn't done anything as it relates to that other than allow them to do what they do best. But together we have blended our efforts in fundraising and grant writing, both to the state of Maryland, to Montgomery County, and to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So all of those efforts combined have allowed us to reach the landmark that we have reached today. And I want to say to each of you, we are so close, and you can help us cross the finish line. We're excited, we're believing that by the end of December, the church will be complete and we'll be ready to enter in. But we need a little push. We need a little something extra to get us over the finish line. And I believe today that our coming together is going to allow us to be successful in that effort. So again, I just want to sincerely thank each of you for hearing us, for seeing us, for sensing us, and for supporting us. Thank you so very much on behalf of the Scotland AME Zion Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Huggins. Next up, I'd like to introduce someone who wears the authentic label of friend as comfortably as anybody in Montgomery County. Council President Andrew Friedson is everywhere all the time, not just in Scotland. Demi knows this. He is everywhere all the time. And I know that this year has brought both the best of times and the worst of times for your family. And so before Andrew begins, I'd love for all of us to have just a quick moment of silence and prayer for Andrew's father, John, who passed away earlier this year. It was just a few hours after attending the Scotland Juneteenth prayer breakfast with Andrew. God bless John, and may his memory be a blessing. Sierra, could we ask you to come up for just a moment? Andrew, I know it's very telling that you brought your family here with you, and Sierra wanted to present something to you, something memorable, something that they hope that you all will cherish. We know you have a great love for the Scotland community that goes beyond a simple transaction. It is love in action, really, right? And so I know that it is telling for all of us that you've brought Demi, of course, and your mom, Leslie, who've been through so much since June, to be in this space, in this beloved community where, as we lift up the Scotland community, we're also lifting you up too. So if you'd like to come on up now and share some thoughts with all of us, we are so eager and willing to hear from you.
Well, I wasn't expecting to be so emotional before I started speaking. I normally get emotional when talking about the Scotland community while I'm speaking, but I'm really honored to be here with my mom and with my wife and to be thinking a lot about my father today, as I know our special guest is certainly thinking about his, and really inspired to be here amongst you. I want to thank Frank and Debbie for opening up your beautiful home to us once again, for opening up your hearts to this community and this really important project, and for being such a light for so many of us on so many causes and so many issues. We join today to commemorate a century of history. 100 years of blessings, 100 years of burdens. This is a critical moment for this church and for this community. It's a critical moment for our broader community, for our county, and for our country. In July 2019, as we all know, the historic Scotland AME Zion Church flooded, figuratively and literally, flooded by the storms of nature and by the stranglehold of institutional racism. There is so much symbolism in water. Beyond its religious significance for Christians in baptism and for Jews with the mikveh, water represents spiritual renewal. It is a basic element of life. We don't create the rain. It comes down upon us. Channeled in the right way, rain creates and it sustains life. But directed in the wrong way, it causes destruction. It can be liquid sunshine, as Reverend Huggins called it when we broke ground on this project. Or it can be sheer devastation. Make no mistake, this church didn't flood because of rain. In the summer of 2019, or in the countless other times it flooded throughout the years, it flooded because of how the rain was channeled. Not by chance, but by choice. By human action, not by natural causes. Decisions to realign Seven Locks Road and to diminish a community that once stood 500 acres strong, with that humble church in the center, to a single street with the church across the way that would now bear the impacts for every single one of those decisions. The rain, which for decades had sustained land founded by William Dove in 1880, and the generations that followed, would go from a blessing to an insurmountable burden. My friends, we can't control the rain, just as we cannot control our history. But what we can do, what we must do, is come together to channel it, to acknowledge it, to understand it, to appreciate it, to do what the great Marylander Frederick Douglass instructed us, to do with our past only as we can make it useful for the present and for the future. Today, we are here to celebrate not all the burdens that this community has taken on over the decades, but all the blessings. The way they have risen up at each and every generation since their founding of what was then called Snake's Den to ensure their community's survival. The Doves, the Masons, the Crawfords, the Thompsons, all the legacy families who established and grew this community and who built this church with their bare hands. And we're here to acknowledge that in key moments throughout the past century, certain extraordinary community leaders stepped up to help. Those of different faiths, but with a shared sense of purpose. Amazing people like Joyce Siegel with Save Our Scotland, who's here today in the back. Like the interfaith community, especially the Jewish community, many of whom are represented here today, who back in the 1960s were inspired by Dr. King, who watched Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel march alongside Dr. King and share in the struggle for civil rights and carried the burden of civil rights together and brought that lesson and brought those inspirational views and took their faith and brought it to action right here in Montgomery County. That same interfaith coalition has joined together once again at this defining moment with leaders like Mitch and Emily Rails and Glenn Stone to ensure that this church, which was the physical center of that 500-acre community, remains its spiritual center forever, a symbol of resilience against all odds, of justice delayed, but of justice that could not be denied. We can't tell the truth, we can't reconcile that truth unless we safeguard the structures that are part of the history, that tell the story of who we are, of how we got here, of who made these moments possible, even the parts of that history that we are not so proud of. I've said it before that if those walls could talk, they would tell the story. Not just the Scotland story. They would tell our community story. They would tell our county story. They would tell our country story. They would tell my story and your story. A community that had been submerged by outside forces is now being lifted up with the help of outside forces. A county is committed today to providing help in the same measure as far too many had previously committed to causing harm. An interfaith coalition dedicated on channeling the rain to sustain this church for the next 100 years. A community devoted to erecting a new structure behind the historic church to change the message once and for all. So it's no longer we're turning our back on you, and it will now be known as we've got your back. Together with the inspiration of Dr. King still resonating and the legacy of the founding families still radiating in this very room at this very moment, we can ensure that no one ever again passes by that small white church and doesn't know what it means, doesn't understand what it represents, doesn't appreciate who made it possible, who made it happen. None of us, my friends, can do everything, but each and every single one of us can do something. That's why we're here today, to honor the last 100 years, the remarkably resilient Scotland community who withstood every single obstacle thrown in their way, and to look ahead to the second century, to carry the torch from the past, to pass it off to the future, to channel the rain for good. So that historic church with humble beginnings has anything but a humble future. Let's do the work together. Let's join together once again, like many people did before. Let's make the extraordinary the ordinary in the way that we step up to help. Here's to the second century for Scotland.
Thank you for that call to action, Andrew. Your stomachs are calling, and I've been told that we're going to take a quick pause so that we can plate the lunch for everyone, and then we'll start the program up again, okay? All right. So, whenever we think about a nonprofit organization and a campaign, we know that you always need the right people in the right places. And so when this nonprofit organization's campaign was kicked off here in Montgomery County, there were two people at the top of everyone's list for the board, a committee seat, an honorary chairperson. And after 12 years of running the county together, Ike and Catherine Leggett could have retired, they could have slowed down a step. They did not. Instead, the Leggetts always find a way to say yes and to lead not just by example, but always with love. And so when Scotland asked, the Leggetts answered, joining Joyce and Alan Siegel as the honorary co-chairs of this campaign. And Ike, I know you're taking a bite right now, but I'm getting ready to put you on the spot here. But on behalf of the thousands of people who have donated sums large and small, I'd like you to come up and tell us why you are so passionate about this project. So please welcome up the beloved Ike Leggett.
Let me first of all correct Ms. Foster. She said that Catherine and I ran the county together for 12 years. Catherine ran the county, I just followed. Let me also acknowledge, every time I've been at an event for Scotland, there have been a number of constant people engaged and involved. I can't thank enough our current county executive for his presence, his leadership, and commitment to this cause. So let's give it up for Mark Elder for his involvement. Thank you, Mark. I go back a number of years. I'm glad to see that the King family is represented here at this event, because just about some years ago, when I was a young college student at Asheville, North Carolina, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. King. And it was at a conference given by the Unitarian Church where I worked that summer. And at this conference, there were probably about 400 or 500 people in attendance at his speech. It was awesome. I thought he was speaking directly and only to me in that room. The power of his voice, his message, and what he had to say to all the people, especially the young people gathered there. And I note, for history purposes, that at this conference, we didn't have all the sophisticated communication equipment. When you hear oftentimes Dr. King speaking, you're listening to an eloquent voice, almost as though you're hearing someone reading poetry. It's loud, it's booming, it's eloquent. But we didn't have all of this. We didn't have all of the current communications. So I want you to think about that. His ability to speak sometimes spontaneously and to do so in a way that we still hear his voice today without all of this fancy equipment. And what would he be saying to us today about this project and where we stand in history? What would he be saying to us gathered in this room? He would not be saying, that we have a long ways to go, and maybe we can get there. You will be saying, we will get there. Dr. Hudson said, we're going to get to the finish line. I'm going to change just slightly what she said. I don't believe in running to the finish line. My motto is to run through the finish line. That's what we're going to do. We're going to run through the finish line. But we have to reflect that based upon the history that we know. And history oftentimes is determined by three essential factors: by people, by events, by time. People, events, and time. But what we remember about history is in many ways reflective of who tells the history. We can't tell the history of Scotland without the voices in Scotland. This is why it is so important that we listen to the voices of Scotland. This project was built upon and communicated through a religious institution with a history in our county. A religious institution with a history, a long history in our county. Keep in mind, there would be no history but for the church, and the church reflects that history. We have an awful lot of history in Montgomery County. You can go to Hosley Road, you can go to Emery Grove, you can go to Sandy Spring, but there's something about Scotland that is so special. Maybe it's because of the sacrifices. Maybe it's because of the location. I think it is because of the people. The people who have struggled, the people who understand what it is to persevere, the people who have hung on when the odds were against them. And so when Andrew and when Paul and others asked Captain and I to join with George Siegel and others to be a part of this, we jumped at the opportunity. Because there's something that reminds me about my church, my upbringing in this little church. And many of you have heard my story about how I grew up in poverty in Louisiana, one of 13 kids, and how my first opportunity to go to college was impacted by my little church. In the depth of poverty, trying to enter college, my church decided that they were going to have a fundraiser. Just show you how poor we were. They raised money all summer for the scholarship fund. And in the South, you know what we did? We sold chicken sandwiches and fish fries and washed cars, and we did all of that all summer. At the end of the summer, the church had raised more money than they had ever raised for any project. It was a grand total of $37. That $37 was divided among 3 students. I got $12. But here's what is important about that little church. They gave everything that they had, and they gave it out of love. And so when I reflect upon where I am today, the head of county, the largest Montgomery County, to have 4 degrees, to serve in the military, to be a White House fellow, and all the other things that happened in my life, it is in part due because of that love given to me by that scholarship out of that church. So every time I pass by and every time I see the people in the community, I am reminded about the Greater St. Lawrence Baptist Church in Alexandria, Louisiana. That's why I jumped at this opportunity. That's why I have contributed. That's why my wife has contributed. That's why we've reached out to so many others. So I'm here to reflect upon the value of our history, but more important, the value of the people and what they've contributed. Dr. Huggins, to get to $9 million is an extraordinary effort. And I want to thank you for your leadership and what you've done. someone who we don't give enough credit to, but has been there day one. You hear from him, you get his emails, he'll bug you to death, but he is there. Paul Turkey. Where's Paul? Paul? Thank you. And so certainly the Rails family and so many others who've been a part of that. Joyce, thank you for your lifelong commitment in Montgomery County, for what you've done to uplift us, to lead by example at a time when other people were standing on the sideline. Thank you. So my final words to you are the following. Let's remember our history, but let's remember and note the people who are making that history. Let's run through this finish line and get this job done. That's the commitment we make today. I join with all of you in acknowledging our history, acknowledge how far we've come, but we are determined to get through that finish line, and we can do it if we do it together. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Ike. We had to put the coach in to get us closer. And you never cease to be an inspirational leader for our community, so thank you. Next, we're going to hear from a member of the Scotland community. If you haven't heard from him, you've probably seen him because we all have to look up to talk to him. I've given it away. Eric Smith is in the 5th generation of Scotlanders who have owned land at Seven Locks Road since his great-great-grandfather William Dove purchased the first parcel back in 1880. Eric's niece and great-nieces, April and Brandy and Sierra, they've been around here working hard, represent the 6th and 7th generation Scotland descendants who have been working tirelessly planning today's 3 events here at the church at 3 p.m. and then at the National Museum of African American History and Culture this evening. And though Eric doesn't look like it, he is old enough to remember the days before Joyce Siegel came along in 1965 to launch the Save Our Scotland campaign. When Eric was a boy, most Scotlanders didn't have running water, or sewer lines, or trash collection services. Some didn't even have electricity. Eric emerged from that upbringing, making up for the lack of resources with an abundance of love. He landed at Georgetown, where he led the Hoyas to the national championship game against Michael Jordan and North Carolina, and he's carried the reputation forward of being one of the greatest athletes and the nicest people this area has ever produced. So Eric, will you come forward now to reflect on what this event and these friendships and the financial support mean to you and your family, both the ones that are here with us and the ones we wish could be here to see what the Second Century Project is accomplishing.
Thank you so much. I don't know if I have to say anything after that. I think thank you all. Where do I begin?
Take your time.
Frank and Debbie, you're just like the gift that keeps on giving. Thank you for your hosting us in this castle. I don't know why people keep saying home.
It's a home.
When I was coming up, I was in a house with 4 or 5 bedrooms, and we had like 12 to 15 people living in it. And if we all were to come here and stay here, we would be like a tic-tac in a whale's mouth. But I'm gonna thank you to the Second Century, Paul Tukey, who's brought me into this He got me engaged to my community again, something I should have done a long time ago. He asked me to do a basketball clinic. And of course, I just said yes. You know, it was just something to give back to the community, and it worked out. Thanks to Letitia Gasaway, who put her time and energy into the Juneteenth thing, and she put her money, resources, and time and energy into backing that clinic up. Thank you to Bernard Scott, my brother-in-law, his sidekick of Paul Tukey's. Thanks to his better half, my sister Francine, and her daughter April, and their nieces Brandy and Sierra.
April is there.
Yeah, April's over here. Yeah. Thank you all for all your tireless work that you've done. Y'all really stepped up. Thank you, Leslie, for being the host, a mystery of hosts. You've time and time stepped up to help out Scotland. As she said, like they said, we didn't have running water at the time. And it's funny that in the 1960s, we didn't have running water. But you turn 60 years later, some odd years later, then we had too much water. But back then, like you said, Joyce came in and helped us out. Thank you, Ms. Siegel, for all you've done. We appreciate you and love you. Man, this is overwhelming. Thank you to all you who have showed up today to support Scotland. We appreciate it. Dr. Martin Luther King, thank you for showing up, and it's great for my kids to meet you. It's just an honor to be here. Thank you all the committee, everybody, Andrew, Leggett's, everybody. Just thank you all. We appreciate, it's one more thing I almost forgot. I'm here with my wife, Yvonne. It just so happens to be her birthday today. Happy birthday, baby. I'm sorry, baby, you know how I get. With my kids, and thank her for putting up with me for 38 years. My oldest son, EJ, Eric Jr., my youngest son, Corey, and my daughter, Noelle. Thank you for blessing me with wonderful kids, as I call them, my offsprings. But I won't be here long. Thank you, Dr. Huggins, for all you've done. You've been a blessing. So bless in each and every one of you. And again, thank you. And if you can help, please. Thank you people that already donated, people already helped and reached out to Scotland. We appreciate you, we love you. Frank, you just been, thank you all.
Jennifer, you're fantastic.
I don't know what this is.
That was very nice.
Well, if you can't hear from Eric Smith and not be moved, then you don't have a heart. But I know all of you do, which is why you're here today. And if you need any reminder at all about how special this community is, talk to Eric, talk to Tish, talk to Bernard and Francine, talk to their beautiful grandchildren and children here. There's so many people here connected and entrenched in this Scotland beloved community who ride hard for this community, and they should, because their ancestors made it possible. So before we bring up the guest of honor, Martin Luther King III, we'd like to hear from our esteemed County Executive, Mark Elrich. And like Andrew Friedson and so many of the council members in this county who share the common denominator of showing up when asked, Mark has never turned his back on Scotland. To date, we should tell you the county has pledged $300,000 in funding to the Second Century Project and even more money to eventually replace that undersized culvert underneath Seven Locks Road that caused the flooding in the first place. So County Executive Elrich, we thank you for your time again, and thank you for being here for this community, and we'd love to hear from you as well this afternoon.
So it's events like this that remind us of the resilience, not only of this community, but of the black community in general in Montgomery County. I'm a kid who was born in 1949. My family lived in DC until about 1960. I saw the district, once they integrated schools with the 54 decision from the Supreme Court, I watched the neighborhood I lived in and the other neighborhoods around go from all white to all black in the space of 6 years. And they came to Montgomery County because they didn't have to worry about black people coming to Montgomery County, because every square inch of it had covenants on the property that said you couldn't sell or rent to black people. They weren't kept out of here because they couldn't afford. My father was a postal clerk. He made $4,000 a year when he was in 1960. He couldn't afford very much but a $20,000 house. There are plenty of other clerks who worked beside him of other colors who could have come out here and would have liked to have come out here had they had the opportunity to, but they were blocked by the racial covenants. When the racial covenants are lifted by 1967, when Montgomery County passes a fair housing law, you see a surge in the black population in Montgomery County, because before that they were left to live in isolated, primarily rural areas in the county. Couldn't get into the other places of the county. I know that Charlotte Caulfield, when we were talking about Littonsville, would say that our community could work on the other side of the Talbot Street Bridge. We could not live on the other side of the Talbot Street Bridge. So there's a long history of Montgomery County, and what happened here happened everywhere. When you think that every square inch of this county was once pretty much slave plantations, you get a sense of the depth of the community, and I think you get a sense of, frankly, why racism is so prevalent, because so many people are raised in that context. When I was, again, went to Montgomery Hills Junior High School in Silver Spring, there was a little community on the right-hand side of Seminary Road that was referred to as Monkey Hollow. Monkey Hollow had outside toilets and no running water. It never got upgraded. It got displaced. Somebody decided this land was worth a lot of money. Let's build houses there, expensive houses for different people, and different people moved there. Montgomery, this is part of Montgomery County's history. And we will not move forward unless we're able to acknowledge what happened here. If you can't talk about it, then you have no way of owning it. And if young people don't have a sense of the depth of the problem, they just blow it off as something that, well, this is just now, this is just the way the people feel. People got to feel that way because there are a lot of forces in society that pushed them in that direction. I was lucky enough to have parents who were politically progressive and pro-civil rights. I remember, I'm older than most of you, I remember the Adlai-Stevenson campaign as I was probably like 7 years old, and my parents were saying, you always vote for the person with the best civil rights record. And to a 7-year-old, they had to explain this to me, but it made sense what they were talking about. And I was lucky enough to see Dr. King at the March on Washington. I didn't get up close enough to meet him and shake his hand, but I took the bus down 16th Street to get close to the monument, and then walked over and got to hear Dr. King. And as a young person, it was really effective. I had no idea that speech was going to be so historically significant. You know, you're hearing it the first time, you're standing out there in a crowd of people. You're not thinking, well, this is, and plus you're 12 years old, so you're not thinking like this is an earth-changing thing. But it always stuck with me, and it stuck with me to see the group of people, black and white, who are out there making a stand for civil rights. And then I fast forward, I don't know how many of you saw the James Baldwin movie, I'm Not Your Negro. And there's a really powerful scene in there where he's interviewed in the halls of Congress. He's pushing civil rights legislation, and a reporter comes up to him and says, people say you're trying to go too fast. You know, you need to slow down. And the tragic part is he said, they want us to wait another 40 years. I was sitting in the movie theater and I'm thinking 40 plus 65 is 2005. It's like, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. The good things I see, is just the ability to organize and put this group of people together, because it's authentic people from Montgomery County who actually really care. I think on the really, really bright side of this, as far as this has come, the distance left to travel is only a fraction of the distance that you've come this far. We will all get there. This thing will be done. And then we have more work to do. You still have a set of townhouses in Scotland that were never meant to last. They were almost built as if they wished the community would go away, and here's a token of townhouses that you can live in now, and probably they'll be gone and you'll be gone at some point. We're going to make sure that it's not gone. We're going to make sure those houses come back to a state that they should be, like the other townhouses that were built there. And I'm really proud of the recreation center and community center we were able to put over there, because those are the kind of things. And I want to call out Ike for this, because we had, when I came on the council in 2006, we had a bunch of rec centers in Montgomery County. We had built a really beautiful rec centers. And then we had these old rec centers in the black communities that hadn't been touched, that were falling about. People would come in and say, the wall is no longer supported by the foundation on the outside. And I came to the council and told us, we're doing this first. We're not going to build the new ones. We're going to build for the people who've already been here and live in these substandard things. And to me, that was one of the most important things I think you did, Ike, because it kind of set a tone, and it said we weren't going to pretend any longer that these weren't issues that we had to deal with. You put it front and center, and we dealt with it. And I go to those centers now, and the people are really happy to have what they have, and they wouldn't have had it if you hadn't taken that step to make it possible. So that's something that to me was very moving and very important. We've got a way to go, but we will finish this project, and then we will take on at the same time other projects. You cannot do this sequentially. We don't have the luxury of saying, we'll do this, and then we've got time to do. We've got to do all things all the time. We've got to figure out where are the pressure points, where are the things that need to be moved here, and then we need to move them. Whether it's restoring this church, whether it's restoring the housing, whether it's dealing with other equity issues in this county, whether it's dealing, I'll say, the public school system, to be blunt. I mean, if you got a crisis in education and you're talking about the low levels of achievement in minority communities, and you've had that conversation for 40 years, ain't much of a crisis. Because if it was a crisis, you would have dealt with it. And we need to deal with these problems, because those kids deserve the same kind of futures that many of us have been able to have. So there's a lot of work to do, but you've come an amazing distance here. We'll support you through the end. We continue to look for things we can do to amplify this. I've had conversations at the state level. I'm trying to see what we can do to move some support from there. But we're not going to stop until you're done, and you're going to get done when you're supposed to be done. I'm excited, and two people I want to thank. Paul Tukey, because you've been thanked by other people, but you have been a bulldog. You've been persistent. The other person, just to thank Joyce again, because inside of a struggle, sometimes you need somebody on the other side, somebody who's inside an institution who can make the institution uncomfortable. It's much more difficult from the outside to make an institution uncomfortable because it's sheltered. But when people inside the institution say this is not right and we need to go a different path, those are the people who can help break the institution open. Joyce, you did a remarkable job. You can see your work, and I know how much the community appreciates you, and I appreciate all the local leadership here. You've done an amazing thing. I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your leadership on this, County Executive Ehrlich. You are truly a friend to this county. And before I introduce our final presenter, I want to go back to the 1960s, and you've heard various people talk about it this afternoon. We already described the conditions that at Scotland when Eric Smith was a boy, for example. And the easy thing at the time might have been to let the government have its way and condemn what was left of Scotland's property. But one woman, a woman you've heard of several times this afternoon, a young Jewish housewife named Joyce Siegel, would not hear from it. And I have heard from so many Scotlanders who told me that that Save Our Scotland coalition that Joyce Siegel helped build is the only reason that we have a community and a church to celebrate today. So please join me again in welcoming Joyce, her daughter Beth, and her granddaughter Leah today. They are sitting at the table right there in the back. So much love and respect for all you've done through the years. Not just back in the 60s, but even now. It's always a joy when Joyce is in the room, and if you have a chance to talk with her, her memories, her vivid memories from that time, from the color to the smell, it's like listening in Technicolor. It's really, really incredible. And what a jewel and a gift you are to all of us, Joyce. I count it among the many blessings that I've had in my life to have the opportunity to listen and to learn from you. So when Geneva Mason and Joyce Siegel held that first community meeting for Scotland back in February of 1965, Joyce left without much hope of success. The job of creating dignified housing for an impoverished neighborhood just seemed too daunting. Who would do all that work? And right after that, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the game. It was a call to arms that reverberates to this day. Dr. King invited clergy from across America to join him in Selma for a peaceful march. And 28 pastors and rabbis boarded a private plane in D.C., marched in Selma, and then came back home, looking for a way to join the civil rights movement right here. And with the Scotland AME Zion Church as the epicenter of those Save Our Scotland meetings, Joyce Siegel, Geneva Mason, Betty Thompson, and so many others made American history with this housing development that was really a first-of-its-kind partnership between the local community and the federal government. So in March, after Scotland hopes to have celebrated the official reopening of its repaired and expanded church, the nation will celebrate 60 years since that march in Selma. And our luncheon's final guest speaker, his face and his voice will be everywhere by then as the patriarch of an iconic family, as the namesake of one of the world's most influential men, and as a tireless champion of interfaith cooperation. We are so honored and excited to spend a full day, because it's a full and complete day, with Martin Luther King III as we celebrate the Montgomery County embodiment of his father's dream. Mr. King, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Let me first thank God for the opportunity to be here in Montgomery County. And thank you, Frank and Debbie, for opening your home and all that you and a collective team of people are doing to continue to build community. I must say that there are a lot of important things that any of us could do in life. But because we are in election season, my father would say, I believe a voteless people is a powerless people. And one of the most important steps that we must take is that short step to the ballot box. And I think our nation and world is at a very critical point. We've had inflections from time to time. But this is maybe beyond crisis. And humanity must decide that we're going to save ourselves. My father's last book, written in 1967, was entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? We've seen chaos for a long time now, but we must build community. And that's what you're doing here at Scotland AME Zion Church. Some of you may know this, but my mom started off as a member of Mount Tabor. You would know that. AME Zion Church in Marion, Alabama, a small town where my father went, and well, actually, he ultimately went. They didn't meet there. They made it in Boston when she was at the Boston Conservatory, and he was at Boston University working on the advanced degrees. But it was what framed who she became was Mount Tabor AME Zion Church. Now, obviously, she married a Baptist preacher and embraced Baptists, but not moving away from her AME Zion roots. So when I heard about what was going on in this community and was invited, I was like, yes, that's wonderful to hear and see. When you talk about protecting, preserving, and expanding community, that is critically important. Because in our society today, some are still turning on each other. But what you're teaching and creating is turning to each other, to lift each other up, to create what my father would have defined as the beloved community. And I also know that a people that do not remember their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And so when we talk about history, we talk about Scotland AME Zion Church and the leadership that is there currently, the pastor, and the vision, because that all biblically we know that when people have no vision, the people could perish. And so it's the vision that helps to build community and helps to sustain community. And certainly, you know, my father and mother, I have to add them because as a partnership, they had a true partnership. Mom and dad didn't just become engaged, and mom particularly after the meeting and the civil rights movement, and after dad died and on April 8th, was killed, I should say, on April 8th of 1968. They started off. In fact, dad would tell you, just to tell you a quick story, dad in the late 50s, early 50s, excuse me, when they met at graduate schools, mom met dad, and they spent 6 hours together roughly. And dad was not really tall at all. And so mom, on a blind date, they came to a park and sat down, and they spent 6 hours together talking. And as dad was coming over, he was dressed very nicely, and mom appreciated that. But she kept looking at him, and she was thinking, well, he's such a little man. Everybody wants a big, tall, having some debonair. And as they talked, they had read a lot of the same books. She said the taller he grew in that 6-hour interaction. And now I'm saying that to say dad would also say that mom had already been involved in peace demonstrations. And he'd say, but this was before he had engaged in peace. He'd read about and learned about Gandhi and so many others, but yet he'd never led a demonstration, but she had been involved in marches. So throughout their life, there was a real partnership. And of course, the love story, because after that 6-hour conversation, he knew at that time that this is the woman he wanted to marry. Now, In 1965, the campaign for garnering the right to vote was waged when the late John Lewis and Hosea Williams led a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And when John Lewis was beaten almost to an inch of his life, had a concussion. But it was the fact that these gentlemen and those others who marched with them, which were probably about 200 plus people, were beaten unmercifully. John Lewis asked the major of the state patrol, could they pray? And while they were praying, that commander told the troops to advance, meaning the sheriff's posse and the state police. That precipitated the opportunity for several other marches when Rabbi Abraham Joshua Huschel joined Dad and others, Catholic ministers, Greek Orthodox ministers, of course, Baptists and AME Zions and everyone else. And when they marched over that bridge, the Voting Rights Act was signed by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Tragically, in 2013, the United States Supreme Court eviscerated the right to vote and the Voting Rights Act. We as a nation are working on a John Lewis voting rights bill that John Lewis put together before he died. And unfortunately, there are some in Congress who still will not support that right. So I'm saying all this to say we got a lot of work to do to build community. And people take the lead from what the United States does. We are still a global leader in the world, and people look to us for dignity. They look to us for respect. They look to us for integrity. And we need to think about, as we embrace this national election, I'm going to get back to Scotland in a minute, but this is critically important, that how we are represented in the world matters. How we show up every day, maybe even show out sometimes. Dad and his team nonviolently showed out, and it transformed our nation and world and reverberates throughout the world. That vision that he had of building the beloved community. That certainly is what Scotland AME Zion Church represents, and what this community represents, and what each of you are engaged in represents. Building community so that it can be sustained. And so that one day in the not too distant future, we will realize the dream, because it has not been realized yet. But what I know is we can. You know, I've heard the I Have a Dream speech. Well, I've listened. No, I hadn't always listened. I've heard thousands and thousands of times. You know, we hear with our ears, but we listen with our heart. Every time I've listened with my heart, those 100 times or so, I shed tears. And if we can get our nation to listen and hear, then we can probably create that beloved community that you are creating a microcosm of here in Scotland. So I am so grateful to have this opportunity to share with you today as you continue to build these bridges, as you continue to build community. Everybody in life can do a little something. My dad used to say, in life one must decide and find out what their calling is, and when they find that calling, they must do their jobs well. So well that the living, the dead, or the unborn could do them no better. He went on to say, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, why go on and sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble? Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of the heavens and earth would have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper that did their job well. Now, when I speak many times, I close with these words, and they're certainly appropriate, I think. When I was 12, 13 years old, I had an opportunity to accompany my mom to her undergraduate institution, Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And on that college was a statue of the educator Horace Mann. And under that statue was an inscription that I, over the years, claimed and identified with the words immediately. The words were, be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity. First time I read that, I said, oh my gosh, that's so powerful. About 14. Then when I came back a few years later, be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity. And after about the fourth or fifth time of visiting, I said, you know, what that really means is we can win victories in our neighborhoods. We can win victories in our schools. We can win victories in our places of worship. We can win victories in our cities, counties, in our states. Some may win victories in our nation, and some may win victories for our world. But all those words mean are, be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all must live a little better than it was when you arrived. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you for those incredibly heartfelt and inspirational words. We can all do something wherever we are to leave the world better than we found it. Before we conclude our official program, I just want to make sure I acknowledge Amy Spitalnick, who is sitting here at the front table. She is with the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, and she's going to be part of our evening panel this evening with Martin Luther King III and 2 additional fabulous panelists, and we hope to see you there. Also, dessert is going to be served, so don't leave yet. And also, there is one lucky person at each table who has a little sticky near their plate. If you have said sticky at your plate, then you may take home the beautiful flower arrangement on the table. We also invite the person with the sticky under the plate to write a big check today. Frank, that was supposed to be at your seat. Somehow it got to my seat. Now, if we haven't made it super clear yet, this Second Century Project still needs money and even more friends. And if you have friends who have friends who have friends, we'll take those introductions. The campaign has raised $8.8 million, but the goal is still 11, and we might even need 12? 11? 11. 11 is where we need to be. So if there's anyone here in this space who can help us close that gap and get the congregation back into the church, we need to hear from you. If you can't do it yourself, we'd love to hear from your friends. If you know somebody who can, let's talk. Bernard is here. Frank and Debbie are here. Pastor Huggins is here. They will all be here through dessert and beyond to hear from you. And the last thing we have to say is, Frank and Debbie, thank you so much. This was absolutely incredible. There are friends, and then there are friends who are like family. And you are family. You are family to the Scotland community. You are family to the Scotland Church. You are family to all of us. So thank you, and thank you. And by the way, I'm told to tell you, because this will be a long day, that Debbie has coffee upstairs if you need a little extra boost to keep you going. So thank you for your time, for your heart, and for your treasure today, all of you. Thank you.